Marvel started their shared MCU universe back in 2008, while the DC animated movies started their shared animated universe back in 2013. Let's look at the beginnings of both these universes and see how they compare.
Superhero landing. Wait for it! Woo! Superhero landing! Yeah, that's really hard on your knees. Totally impractical. They all do it.
Iron Man stars Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, in the role that would define his career. His arc in this movie is easily the reason this movie works so well. He starts out an engineering genius who also happens to be a trust fund baby with no responsibility and no interest in the problems of others. He was born into a company that makes weapons, and he couldn't care less what those weapons do to the world.
Tony, the best thing about Tony is also the worst thing. He's always working.
Completely self-involved to an extreme degree. He is kidnapped by terrorists and forced to make a weapon for them. He instead makes a rough suit of armor to escape. His experience teaches him that the weapons business he is in is immoral, and when he returns, he makes a vow to end the business as it currently exists. His arc comes naturally, and Downey Jr. sells it by making his character likable throughout, so that we are annoyed but understand why the people around him put up with him.
What's wrong with you?
What?
3 hours.
I got caught doing a piece for Vanity Fair.
For 3 hours. For 3 hours, you got me standing.
Waiting on you now. Let's go. Come on. Wheels up!
And with him, when he makes his change for the better.
There's no art opening. There is no benefit. There is nothing to sign. There is the next mission, and nothing else.
Justice League, the Flashpoint Paradox, is titled Justice League, but the main hero is very much Barry Allen, aka The Flash, as voiced by Justin Chambers. This is the story where he gets to go back in time and prevent the death of his mother, the tragedy that traumatized him throughout his life, and he learns the price of such an action. The story is very It's a Wonderful Life inspired, and it works more or less. The issue with it will be brought up later. But it plays out as a morality tale about how Flash learns that perhaps things aren't so bad as they could be. After all, without his mom's death and his father's incarceration, he would likely have never had the interest in criminology that he had, and that means the lab accident that turned him into the Flash would never have happened.
Brace yourself for a shock. I'm the Flash.
Oh. What's the Flash?
There he is. Quick! Yep, that's him. Sir? You live around here? Sir? Sir, stop! I hope you got a license to carry that thing. Why don't we take a little ride downtown, Flashy?
It's tragic that his mother died, but without her death, it dooms all the people Flash saved to death. It actually proves to have far greater consequences than that, and we see it in this movie. Flash works very well as the lead of the story, but it's no contest. Robert Downey Jr. is perfect for the role of Iron Man, and this is arguably him as best in the role. Point for Marvel.
लेकिन हम जिनको तुम वहशी दरिंदे समझते हो वीरान और बंजर कोनों में किस खातिर जमा हो रहे हैं?
The Flashpoint Paradox has C. Thomas Howell as Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash. He spends the movie essentially tormenting Flash. His first plan is to place bombs on the Flash villains in the Flash Museum that will destroy much of Central City. Flash and the Justice League disable them, but then he gets to give Flash a taunt that encourages Flash to go back in time and save his mom.
Enjoy your petty little victories, Flash. But no matter how fast you run, you can't save everyone. Not the ones that matter to you.
An argument can be made that the Flash is the real villain here. He falls for Thawne's taunt and creates a whole new world by saving his mom, and now has to undo the damage he has done. Of course, Thawne does what he can to prevent Flash from doing that.
As long as I can siphon off the Speed Force, You can't escape this timeline.
He encourages Flash to be his worst. Flash does something that seems like a good thing, but instead sends the world into chaos. Iron Man has Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane. He is established as a father figure who took care of Tony when Howard died, but the movie doesn't really treat him that way. He is in many ways the antithesis of Tony. At the beginning, we see him as a responsible, hardworking businessman, always there to pick up Tony's slack. But as the movie progresses, we find out that he was the person who hired the terrorists to kill Tony, and only once the terrorists figured out who their target was do they take him hostage instead.
You did not tell us that the target you paid us to kill was the great Tony Stark. As you can see, Obadiah Stane, your deception and lies will cost you dearly. The price to kill Tony Stark has just gone up.
So Tony is carefree until he sees the true consequences of his business. At that point, he decides he will make a change to his business. Obadiah knows the true consequences of the business. In fact, he embraces it towards his own ends. Tony sees the error in his ways and tries to make himself and the world around him better. Obadiah knows those flaws and defines himself by those features. Tony wants to change the system. Obadiah is the system. The more I analyze this movie, I love this dynamic, which is why the movie is a real letdown in this department. Not long after we learn the true difference between these men, does it become this robot suit versus robot suit fight. It doesn't have any time to explore these issues and rather becomes this mad dash to the end of the movie. It's not enough to ruin the movie by any means, but it is by far the weakest aspect. It builds up this great idea for hero versus villain and uses it to follow standard superhero movie formula rather than look for a more natural end. This isn't a particularly easy comparison. Stane is much more developed, but also underused for his development. Thawne is exactly what he needs to be in the movie. Both these movies are very hero-centric, and the role of the villain is vital in how it relates to the hero specifically. Using this standard, it seems clear DC has to get the point here.
You didn't stop JFK from getting assassinated, or make sure Hitler stayed in art school. You saved your mommy. And in a supreme act of selfishness, shattered history like a rank amateur.
Iron Man's screenplay is by Mark Fergus, Hawk Ostby, Art Marcum, and Matt Holloway. It is about how the military-industrial complex is a self-perpetuating monster designed not only to make weapons of war, but also to make war because peace doesn't get them those sweet, sweet government contracts.
No, throw it up, I'm kidding. Yeah, peace. I love peace. I'll be out of a job with peace.
Or, at least, I wish it was. Iron Man addresses some of the ideas of the impacts of war on people and how the creation of these weapons can help prolong the war rather than end it when these weapons frequently end up in enemy hands. We also get a bit more depth when we see how Obadiah literally sells weapons to terrorists. This isn't explored, but he is surely taking that and using it as a reason why the government needs to buy more weapons in order to defend themselves from the terrorists he armed. The movie isn't completely silent on this issue, but doesn't dive deep enough into it. It shows how a corrupt businessman sells to terrorists and presents it as bad, but doesn't look at the environment that not only allows him to do this, but encourages it. After all, the bottom line is all that matters in a free market. All that being said, we cannot judge this movie on what I want it to be or what it could be. Rather, we judge it for what it is. To this movie's credit, it is more interested in focusing on Tony's story, which is very much the strength of this movie. His recognition that what his company does is evil, and his goal to change that are all very prominent in this movie and strong points. Tony's entire arc is easily the heart of this movie, and on that front, it's a fairly big success. The Flashpoint Paradox has a screenplay by James Krieg and is based on the graphic novel by Jeff Johns and Andy Kubert. I previously called this the superhero version of It's a Wonderful Life, which it really is. Barry decides the world would be better if his mother was still alive. This means that he would never become the Flash, and unfortunately does dilute this a bit with the Reverse Flash introducing the idea that by breaking the time barrier, he created a time boom.
Break the sound barrier and there's a sonic boom. You broke the time barrier, Flash. Time boom. Ripples of distortion radiated out through that point of impact, shifting everything just a tiny bit, but enough.
From a storytelling perspective, this allows the writers the ability to change things that happened before the death of Flash's mother. It is, in my opinion, a bit lazy. A much more interesting idea would have been to show how the world went to hell simply without the Flash. This likely won't be as grandiose as the story with Atlantis and Themyscira at war. but could still be done and tell the same story to greater effect. While both these movies have story issues where they don't reach the greatness they should, one doesn't remotely try. The other tries and stumbles a little bit, but admittedly not a lot. Let's be blunt. If Iron Man was a story-focused movie, it won't be as fondly remembered as it is. The Flashpoint Paradox is story-focused and works incredibly well. It's a point for DC.
I just wanted to save her. You didn't stop JFK from getting assassinated, or make sure Hitler stayed in art school. You saved your mommy. You missed her.
The Flashpoint Paradox has Michael B. Jordan as the voice of Cyborg, Kevin McKidd as Flashpoint Batman, Kevin Conroy as regular Timeline Batman, Sam Daly as Superman, Dana Delaney as Lois Lane, Gray Griffin as Nora Allen, Carrie Ewells as Aquaman, Nathan Fillion as Hal Jordan, Patrick Swayze as Dalton, and Vanessa Marshall as Wonder Woman. The movie has a lot of supporting characters. Unfortunately, most of them don't mean a lot. We have a lot of cutaways, including one with Lex Luthor and Deathstroke, that don't mean much to the story, other than to establish that the world is going to hell very quickly. Mara really gets the short straw here. She sees Aquaman and Wonder Woman together, decides to try to kill Wonder Woman. She fails and Wonder Woman kills her, which is why they are at war. Honestly, none of those three look good here. Cyborg does alright as one of the few heroes who is still trying to be a hero. Flashpoint Batman has the biggest role of the bunch, helping Barry restore the universe with the promise that will restore his son's life. Overall, there are strong aspects here, but most of the characters are essentially written to be bizarro versions of themselves. Iron Man has Terrence Howard as James Rhodes, Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts, Leslie Bibb as Christine Everhart, and Shaun Toub as Yinsen. What's interesting here is how all these characters break down into their representation of Tony. Rhodey is the avatar for Tony's professional life, which he's been neglecting. Pepper is the avatar for his personal life, which he's been neglecting. We really see, as this movie progresses, how they react to finding out what Tony is doing. Pepper is the avatar for his personal life and is much more distressed and concerned.
Are those bullet holes?
She recognizes that Tony is trying to do the right thing, but also does not want him pushing himself too far, which he seems dedicated to doing. Rhodey, on the other hand, is completely on board, making sure that the Air Force stays out of Tony's way as he dukes it out with Obadiah.
Not necessary, people, just a training exercise.
Tony is learning to be more responsible in his professional life, but still neglecting his personal life more than he should, despite some efforts from him to fix that.
Tell me you never think about that night.
What night?
You know.
Are you talking about the night that we danced and went up on the roof and you went downstairs to get me a drink and you left me there by myself? Is that the night you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Christine Everhart is a presentation of the type of person who drags Tony down. Not only does she accurately attack him for the things done by his weapons company.
Okay, go.
You've been called the Da Vinci of our time. What do you say to that?
Absolutely ridiculous. I don't paint.
And what do you say to your other nickname, the Merchant of Death?
That's not bad.
She then turns around and sleeps with him. She not only attacks him for his irresponsible behavior, she then encourages it by joining him in it. She is nothing more than a person who brings out the worst in Tony.
I do anything and everything that Mr. Sark requires, including occasionally taking out the trash. Will that be all?
Which brings us to Yinsen, the fellow prisoner who helps Tony in the creation of his first suit in the cave. He is the opposite of Christine. He brings out the best in Tony and essentially serves as the movie's Uncle Ben character. He sets Tony on the right path, and his death cements for Tony that he is now on this path and nothing will ever shake him loose. Not even Christine Everhart, who we see him snub in the next movie.
She did quite a spread on Tony last year.
And she wrote a story as well.
It was very impressive.
That was good.
The performances are all great, with the real standouts being Paltrow and Toub. Paltrow, in particular, has to play a naggy character, but she plays it as very caring, making the audience sympathize with her and Stark, even when they are on opposing sides of an issue. It's no contest here. Iron Man's supporting characters are few, but work perfectly to tell Tony's story. Flashpoint's characters are just crazy versions of the classic heroes. Point for Marvel.
Next time, baby.
Iron Man has a score by Raman Djawadi, and it incorporates a lot of rock elements, which is welcome and gives the score a distinctive sound. A lot of the score is rather forgettable, which has become the MCU's MO at this point. But there's a lot of musical stingers here that anyone would quickly recognize. The movie also effectively uses mechanical sounds of gears and such when we see the characters in suits, which adds a hint of realism, making it feel like these are real people in machines. The Flashpoint Paradox score is by Frederick Weidman, and it is a lot like the Iron Man score, except without the standout elements.
Friends.
The sound design is the same way. It works, but doesn't provide anything special that really stands out. This is an easy one again. It's a point for Marvel.
I am Iron Man.
The Flashpoint Paradox is done by the Warner Bros. DC animation division, and it is once again a great looking piece of animation. Vibrant colors, plenty of frames so as not to look choppy. Animation is able to do something difficult in live action and fully embrace the comic book world that's based on. This movie really shows that. Iron Man has a very standard look for the most part, standard Marvel Studios lighting, camera angles that tell the story effectively but do little else. It works, but it's no real standout. The effects are rather effective though. The suit is a mix of CGI and real elements, and the end result is fairly seamless, just enough real elements to make the CGI stand out. There are times when you can tell the CGI, but they are the exception and not the rule. This one isn't all that close at all. If I had to watch one of these on mute, it would definitely be Flashpoint Paradox. Point for DC. It all comes down to this final point. Which movie was what it truly wanted to be? Which movie achieved what it wanted? It gets really tricky here. Iron Man is meant to be a solo movie that introduces the audience to Tony Stark and Iron Man. It succeeds in this to near perfection. Flashpoint Paradox is a story of a superhero for once doing something selfish and how the world suffers consequences from that. It succeeds as well. Traditionally, genre would ally with story themes, but here it seems like the goals of these movies are different enough that may not. It may be close to impossible to tell which movie did its job better at the story it wanted to tell. Iron Man wanted to introduce the world to Iron Man, and thus told a very Iron Man-centric story, and did amazingly well. Flashpoint Paradox wanted to tell a story about a superhero meaning well, but doing something he knows he shouldn't do and paying the price, and again does this amazingly well. I'll confess, between these two, I think Iron Man did better introducing its character than Flashpoint did telling its story, but that's debatable. But these movies also want to establish a new self-contained universe. Iron Man does this with a post-credit scene introducing the world to Nick Fury and the idea of the Avengers. Flashpoint does this with a mid-credit scene with parademons. That's what made Iron Man so exciting. It gave us a character we like and said, there will be more, and they will interact. That's awesome. Flashpoint says, a universe you haven't seen yet will get attacked by parademons. One is definitely more exciting than the other. And once you consider that, it's not really close. It's a point for Marvel.
Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
This was a fairly close contest. I highly advise anyone who has not seen the Flashpoint Paradox to check it out. It's one of the strongest of the DC animated movies. Flashpoint does make me wish DC animated movies weren't trapped under some arbitrary 80-minute time limit. There are moments here that feel rushed, that should be allowed to breathe.
Barry, when I was a little girl, Grandma taught me a prayer. Accept the things you cannot change, have the courage to change the things you can, and have the wisdom to know the difference.
Iron Man has the freedom to allow those moments, which makes it an enjoyable watch even though it has significantly less action. Still, Flashpoint is a real standout among the DC animated movies, which is a catalog filled with standouts.
He told me that old man Potter deposited exactly $8,000 right after I left. It was him!
Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go get it!
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.